Are you in the market for a portable table saw that has the robustness to use in a shop environment as well? If so, I'm going to take the deepest dive look ever at the DeWalt DWE 7491. Stay tuned. Hey guys, Paul here with Tool Metrics. Today I've got in the shop a DeWalt portable table saw, job site saw. I'm going to look at it from the perspective of a construction person that would use that on a job site, as well as a home hobbyist woodworker. I get a lot of questions from woodworkers who want a light table saw that they can move around in their shop easily and even hang up on the wall when they're done. So that is the perspective that I'm going to look at. Just to kind of overview the feature set that you have here, you got a 15 amp motor, so plenty of power, and I'll get into that when I do some performance tests. It has an impressive 32.5-inch rip capacity, so you could lay a sheet of plywood on here and not only rip it to the center, which 24 inches would get you there, but this also gives you some additional capacity to give you better balance and stabilization of that sheet of plywood on here. And I'll show you, get into some of the cool features around the fence. Overall, I'm really impressed by the thoughtfulness of this. The people that were involved in designing this saw were either construction workers at some point in their life, or they listened to people that were using the previous generation of saw. Lots of neat innovation to keep this compact and light, yet give it a lot of features and a robustness. Saw weighs in at 87 pounds, which I find to be kind of in the sweet spot. It's heavy enough to be stable and light enough to pick up and move around with a little bit of effort. So really nice, I think, careful, thoughtful design. I like the roll cage frame design. Has a durability to have some resistance and some robustness to being dropped or thumped around. It doesn't waste any material where it's not needed. So these open sides are very nice, giving you accessibility to make adjustments, do maintenance underneath the table and so forth. And they don't have sides in there that add extra weight. So I think that's really nice. Everything from a safety perspective is contained within the blade shroud, so there's no safety or debris challenges around that design. I like that the saw has onboard storage for just about all of the accessories that you have or would come with that. I wish there was a spot for an extra blade to be able to go back and forth between a plywood blade and a ripping blade, or have a smaller diameter blade, which I think is a neat idea to have something like that on hand for a saw like this. But pretty much everything else is has a place right on board with the saw. So let's take a look underneath the saw and talk about the kind of the infrastructure of the saw, if you will, which I think is really important to take a look at when you're looking at a table saw. All right, I flipped the saw over and you can get a look at what's under the hood here. I've removed this shroud housing so we can get a look at the internals a little bit better. This is made of plastic, I'd say medium duty. I'd rather see metal, but this is not serving any structural purpose, so I guess I'm okay with it being plastic. At least it's fairly heavy and rigid. I like the assembly around the blade. This is a pretty heavy gauge aluminum, really built for a combination of durability and portability. A couple neat things regarding dust collection that exceed my expectation. I really didn't have very high expectations about dust collection on a saw that is meant for use in the field, although I know a lot of these will get used inside of homes when they're doing remodels and so forth, so they do, it's wise that they have addressed dust collection. So this canvas strip, I'm sure, is there to contain dust, and when this additional shroud member is in place, it really seals up the unit very nicely. So I'm really looking forward to hooking this up to a shop vac or dust collector and see what it's capable of doing from a dust collection perspective. I also love the fact that we've got this 2.5-inch dust port built right into the shroud mechanism. So that's a direct run. It's going to be a very good collection mechanism compared to a lot of shop saws that have hose that runs through the internals of the cabinet. This is just a direct run right to the saw, which is great because you're not going to have a super huge dust collection cyclone out in the field. You're going to have a shop vac that's going to be hooked up to that, and I'm optimistic that this is going to do a decent job, and I'm going to take a good look at that. The trunnion apparatus is a steel plate bent. It looks to be about roughly an 1/8 inch thick. It has a narrow point of attachment to the saw undercarriage. I'd like to see that a little bit beefier. That raises a little bit of concern. I think that could be more rigid. But the proof will be in the pudding when I do some cuts at various angles and see if that trunnion mechanism can hold the blade rigid throughout those cuts.
Here we have a good quality worm gear on a threaded steel rod, and also 2 polished steel rods to maintain registration vertically as the blade is raised and lowered.
I like the blade guard on here. Decent construction, independent side panels to allow you to raise it up for material cutting on one side while the other side stays down against the table.
Using this very cool lever on the side, it's so easy to remove and install both the blade guard and the separate splitter. This might be my favorite feature on the saw. Installing a blade is quite easy with the 2 wrenches provided, and the throat plate installs easily with the twist locking design. The large hand wheel raises and lowers the blade effortlessly, giving you a nice micro adjust mechanism. I wish there was a locking design to hold the blade at a particular position, but it's not a problem. The bevel adjustment was easy to use and accurate, with positive stops at 90 and 45 that were very easy to adjust right from the front of the saw. The switch is durably made and easy to reach with your knee if you're in a situation where you need to turn it off that way.
By my measure, the miter gauge is just okay. I like that it's metal, and I like that it's easy to read. I don't like that there are not 0 stops for 90 and 45, and I don't like the sloppiness in the track. The dust collection setup on the saw completely exceeded my expectations with a lower port and an upper port. Now the lower port is 2.5 inches and a standard shop vac connection worked perfectly on here. This is probably what most people are going to do when they're using this saw on a job site. The upper connection is 1.5 inches, and if I was going to set this up permanently or semi-permanently in a shop, I would run a port to both the upper and lower, assuming that I had enough suction to manage both. A 4-inch dust collection system split into 2.5 and 1.5 would be what you would want at a minimum for that. I mostly connected down below. Up above, I did connect 2 as well for a time, and when I had both of them going with adequate suction, it was almost foolproof. Still some would get away up above. Down below it was running very clean. And this is just a great surprise on a saw like this to have good dust collection. There's a lot to love about this fence design. Rack and pinion adjustment gives you great precision. I found it to be extremely accurate throughout the entire range of measurements. And it's got a dual position option that allows you to release the fence and move it out if you need to extend it out to get the full 32.5-inch rip capacity for that big piece of plywood. And then you get the fence into position, lock it in place using the mechanism below, and you're ready to rock and roll. And when you're using the outer fence position, you get a second tape to give you a good clear indicator of the distance between the blade and the fence.
The fence also has this cool flip down accessory that allows you to support longer pieces of plywood as you're doing a cross cut so they don't fall down into the gap, and also can be tucked down at table height to support thin ripping operations where you actually slip the fence underneath the blade guard.
I also just love these telescoping fence rails that allow you to have all that capacity on the saw when you want that 32-inch capacity, but when you don't and you want the saw to be compact, it just rolls right back up. I just think that is such a clever design. All right, here we can get a nice look at the mechanism used to lock and unlock the fence. So we've got a threaded steel rod with a heavy-duty spring-loaded mechanism to release and then lock in after the fence is slid into place with the rack and pinion design.
Using a high-quality straight edge and a feeler gauge, I measured table flatness as well as fence flatness to be within about 1.5 1/1000ths of an inch, which is well within my tolerances for a table saw. When I tested for blade parallelism, however, it was off by about 40 1/1000ths of an inch, which is way too much in my view. So I made the adjustment, which took only about 12 minutes, and I was back within a couple thousandths of an inch, which made me happy. With the saw running idly, I found it to draw about 8.5 amps. When I was ripping construction lumber, I found it to run a little bit hotter, up in the 18 plus amp range, which suggests to me that you want to use a 20 amp circuit for this saw. I measured RPM at about 4,900, which is screaming fast. That gives you a linear velocity of about 300 miles an hour, so I'd suggest using a smaller diameter blade if your cut can allow it. Sound output is quite high at about 92 decibels, so wear your hearing protection, and again, if you can use a smaller diameter blade, that will drop that down by quite a bit as well. I ran a couple real-world performance tests, like ripping a 2-inch thick chunk of red oak, which is a good test. Passed that with flying colors. I also decided to resaw a 2x6, which is a good test for a job site saw, and it passed that with flying colors as well. It even produced, kind of to my surprise, very good cut quality during that operation. Give me a good book matched resaw. I also ran some tests with a full 3/4 inch dado stack, where I ran some test cuts on a piece of birch plywood, and it really produced a nice cut quality, had plenty of power for the operation, no problem whatsoever. I ran a bunch of test cuts where I switched the saw back and forth between 90 and 45 degree cuts, and it maintained accuracy as I went back and forth in these cuts.
This saw bundle comes with the scissor style stand rather than the stand on wheels. I like this a little bit better. I think it's less bulky. It's plenty rigid, durable, can take a good solid kick and get smacked around a little bit. I wish it had a better release mechanism. It bolts down to the stand, so unbolting it and rebolting it, it's a little bit of a hassle, but for the most part, while it's set up, plenty lightweight and yet rigid. And it also folds up nicely when you take the saw off it and hang it on the wall. All right, that wraps up my look at the DeWalt job site table saw. I think it's a really good candidate for a job site, but I also feel like home shop woodworkers would have a good experience using this for fine woodworking, furniture, boxes, what have you. I think that it has the power, the precision, and the repeatability of cuts that you would need for projects like that. So let me know down below if you have questions, and I hope you'll subscribe and come back to the Tool Metrics channel for more DIY, woodworking, and tool-related videos.